to be with you today, and this is the fourth in the series for the OPI staff. This one today is service planning. We did one called OPI Basics, and then we did a second one called OPI Forms and Fees, and then we did a third one that's called CAPS and Client Detail, CAPS Assessment and Client Detail, and today's is service planning. So we're very excited to have Mark Acuna with us again, and I'm going to turn the floor over to him. Mark?
Thank you, Sue Ann, and I hope you can hear me good. This is what we're going to call Module 4 for service planning. And so let's begin. And we just are going to take it for granted that we have done an OPI CAPS assessment and now need to move on to service planning so that you can add a home care worker or an agency or some other services, and that's the purpose for service. So the order of completing the sections of CAPS is to complete that CAPS assessment and to get the resulting SPL so that we know that somebody qualifies according to your AAA area plan and have the correct SPL level. Then we want to complete the client details, and for the OPI program, we require that one diagnosis is placed in client details. That's about the only requirement for client details. So there are some other components there, but you don't need to worry about them. And then we complete the service plan, which is what we're going to be covering today. Now, the CAPS service plan, if you were to open that section, which we're going to show you how in just a moment, but it contains 3 segments. So first there's the service benefit segment, and that's used to authorize the benefit type and the date range for your benefit. Then there's an hours segment used to select and authorize the number of hours that you are going to be giving the consumer or the client, and then the service plan segment is used to assign those providers that are going to be providing the care or the services. So let's get oriented to the actual screen itself, what it looks like, and where those different segments are. So first of all, you see highlighted here on this slide is the service benefit area of service planning. So that's the top portion. And you can see here that we have an OPI category of benefit, and we also have some date ranges that we're going to be talking about. And then we'll tell you all about that status column also. The next segment is kind of the middle segment, and we call that the hours segment. This is where we determine not only a date range for the hours, but determine how many hours are going to be allowed for this plan. And then the third section is the bottom section of service planning. That's where we select the providers, we assign them the certain number of hours, and we do other important things so that we can provide a task list for those providers and information to complete vouchers, the system so that they can be paid. Now, each of these 3 sections are going to have 3 separate action buttons. We're going to be using those action buttons when we approve each section. So I wanted to orient you to know where those action buttons are. There's kind of abbreviations on the buttons, but the first one on the top is the benefit action button, then the hours action, and the plan action. You'll also notice that right above the hours action button is the view detail button. We're also going to be using that to look at the details of the hours, and you'll see that as we make progress through this. Also, there is that column, and it's the status column. And our goal when we complete an entire service planning section is to have each section be approved. So if a section is in pending, that means that we haven't finished that section and we still need to complete it. So we'll see that when we cover each individual section, but at the end, we should see each one of these be approved just as we've shown here. That's our goal. Now let's open CAP service planning, and I'll show you that from the very beginning. So if you've opened up an OPI case for that particular person or individual, and you look at the toolbar at the very top of Access, you will see the book icon. Book icon, when you press on that, opens up a CAP menu that looks exactly as you see here on the screen. It will be a pop-up box, and you'll see three segments on it. There's assessment, there's client details, and there's service planning. So if you've been following these trainings, you will already be familiar with the assessment button. That's how we begin or get back to edit assessment. Client details, we discussed at the last training. That's where we would enter in the diagnosis for the particular individual. And then the last button is going to be one for service planning, and that's what we're going to be using and talking about. If you're wondering about the CAP button at the very bottom, that's only for CAP planning that was done prior to 2008. You will probably never use that button because we will not need to go back that year's CAPS assessment for any reason. Okay, so we're going to launch a new assessment, and in order to do that, what we've done, for new planning, we go to the CAPS book icon from the toolbar, and we're going to select the service planning button from the menu. Then we're going to click the next button. Once we do that, it will open up a new screen for us that looks exactly like this. Now, to select the service benefit or to begin the whole planning process, we will first need to select the assessment. Now, notice here that in this example, the red arrow is pointing to an empty white box. You will see that often, especially if this particular individual has more than one CAPS assessment. If the individual has only had one assessment for their entire case, that assessment will be listed here. It will describe the type of assessment and the date. But if there's more than one assessment, we're going to have to use the drop-down list, which is the tiny little arrow button that I'm circling right now. As you push that button, you'll get a drop-down list that will allow you to select one of the assessments so that you can do service planning on it. And we almost always use the top assessment because that is the most current assessment according to date. So let's go to the next screen, and you can see here that we've already selected an assessment. This particular one is dated on 2014. It's an OPI assessment, and that comp simply means that this assessment is complete. So that's a good assessment. We want to use it. So in order for us to select a benefit, we're going to see that once we select the assessment, a blue line will appear under the benefits section, and you can see it here. Blue line is going to be empty. It's going to have zeros for begin date, but it does have an end date. Now, the reason it has an end date is because this CAPS assessment that you selected, and look right up here, we can see that it has an assessment date and it's valid until a certain date, which in this case is February 28th of 2015. And so that valid until date falls into the end date right here of the benefit. So that date automatically defaults in there, but we've got to select the begin date. So in order for us to select the correct category of benefit, we're going to use the little drop-down button and select OPI. Now remember, we are only doing OPI assessments for OPI, not Title 19. And once we do that, our only option for a service benefit category is going to be OPI. So in this slide, you will see we've already selected the OPI service category benefit, and we have entered a begin date. Now remember, the end date defaults to the valid until date that we see up here. And we can also see, although not on this slide, that the status would default to pending because we really haven't approved this benefit yet. So let's talk a little bit about benefit begin date and the service benefit end date. Begin date is the date when authorized services begin. So if we use the example of a home care worker that begins to go into the home to help one of our OPI clients, the first day that the home care worker enters that home and begins service, that's when we would open the service benefit or begin the service benefit. That is the date of the beginning of the benefit. We don't like to establish a benefit before that period of time the home care worker starts, because there are some people that drag their heels in hiring a home care worker, and sometimes that entire process falls through altogether. So if we've already approved a benefit and nothing is going to be happening on the home front, then we're going to have to invalidate the benefit. So we actually don't start the benefit until services begin. At that point, we will place a begin date. Now, the end dates, as we've said several times, default to the expiration date of the current CAHPS assessment. CAHPS assessment lasts an entire year, and we can't go beyond that year in our service benefit or planning. So we're limited to that period of time of that 1-year period when the CAHPS assessment. Now, every time you open a service planning section and select a CAHPS assessment, the valid date range for that entire year is going to be shown you at the very top of service planning. So you won't really have to go back and forth to a different section of CAHPS to see those dates. Those dates are clearly noted for you at the top of service. Okay, let's talk about those service benefit dates. There are times when we might need to end a service benefit. We really do not need to end the service benefit if there is continual services being offered to the individual. But there are times when you do have to end an OPI benefit, and normally that's when the case is closed. So we would end the service benefit before its expiration date or the death of the individual. But otherwise, there is really no reason for you to change the benefit. Now, we often change the service planning because people sometimes have different home care workers come and go, or an agency changes, or we switch from a home care worker to an agency. So service planning can change within that period of time. The benefit itself should stay the same. It's an OPI benefit for an OPI program, and it's within the year date range. So there's no reason to really close or end the benefit date unless the case is closed for the person. Now, there are times that a case manager will inadvertently add a second benefit line to that top section of service planning. Now, this happens by accident because if a person presses this square right next to the word benefit, that square button is an add a record button. It will add another line to benefit. Now, if that happens accidentally, we will need to invalidate that line. If we did it on purpose because for one reason or another, the top service benefit line didn't go to the full date range that it needed to go, we will need a second line in order to a seamless continuity of dates. But if that happens inadvertently, I will show you what we'll need to do in order to get rid of that. But first of all, take note that the new record button will always add a second line, and the second line will be blue, highlighted blue, and it will be on top of, not below, the current line that was already there before that time. Now, the status will be pending. Now remember, it's not necessary to end the service benefit when changes are made to the plan. We can just keep the service benefit as it is. Now if we accidentally added that line, we'll need to do a few things. And first of all, we need to enter some dates into the line that we're going to invalidate, because the system will not allow us to go to the action button if we don't add a date range. So what I suggest, if you accidentally added a new line, is that you enter today's date as the begin date and enter the same date as the end date. Now that you have dates in there, press the action button. That will open up a window that looks exactly like what you see on the screen at this moment. And then the red arrow points the button that says Invalidate Benefit Hours and Plan. You will need to select that button and then click OK, and that will make that line invalid. Now the line will never disappear. It will always be there for you to view, but the status of that line will be invalid. You won't need to worry about it. It's not going to interfere any other benefit line if it's invalid. We're going to go next to the hours segment now that we have finished doing the benefit dates. Hours segment is really a place where we see a few different types of hours, and this can be a little bit confusing because assessment and access uses varied terminology for these hours. So assessment hours are those hours based on the CAHPS assessment. So whenever you do a CAHPS assessment for OPI and finish that assessment, you're not only going to get an STL result, but you're going to get some hours that the person has earned as a result of their assessment based on state algorithm in awarding those hours according to the need level. Then we have allowed hours. Those are hours selected by the case manager to carry over to the service plan. So the case manager will select from the assessment hours in order to allowed hours, and you'll see this a little more clearly next. Then we also have exception hours. Now, the only reason I mention this is because you're going to see a column for exception hours, but very few of you will ever use exception hours for OPI, so we will not discuss exception hours during this training. That's probably something, if your AAA does allow exception hours for OPI above the normal limit, then you will have to talk to quality assurance or your supervisor in order to get the service planning accomplished with those exception hours. It usually takes supervisor approval. Okay, so we're going to begin the hours segment by clicking on the hours begin date box. So you see here my cursor is hovering above it. If you press on that white begin date box, it's automatically going to open up a new line which will be highlighted blue, and that will give you the opportunity to enter the date range that corresponds with the service benefit date. So really what you should be doing is you should be using the same date range that you have in service benefit, and see here the view detail button that's pointed at by the second red arrow. And we're going to see what that looks like. So once you press the View Detail button, now we see some hours, and this is where I can begin explaining the difference between those assessed hours and allowed hours. Now, in this example, we're going to see in the first column the assessment hour. So in this particular assessment, the person was a minimal assist in dressing and grooming, and that assessment gave them 5 hours for that category. They were a minimal assist for eating, and the assessment gave them 5 hours for that. And they were a substantial assist, the IADL category of housekeeping. So that gave them 10 hours. So they actually have a total of 20 hours that are assessment hours. Now, if we go to the next column, which are the allowed hours, that column is normally going to be blank because the case manager needs to decide how many of the assessment hours they're going to allow. Now, in this case, case manager has selected all the hours and has made no changes. So the allowed hours are 5 dressing and grooming, 5 eating, and 10 housekeeping. So there have been no adjustments and no changes to the hours. This is an easy one because this seems to fit into most AAA plans that might have a maximum of 20 hours to give to someone. OPI program, since the assessment only gave 20 hours, case manager can allow all 20 hours, and those can be utilized for the client's needs. But other AAAs might have a different level of hours or a maximum number of hours, and so we'll need to do some adjustments there, and I'll show you that. Here in this example, we see that the assessment hours were 26, but the case manager only allowed 20 hours, 10 for bath and personal hygiene, and 10 for housekeeping. So stopping hours omitted, so instead of 6, the case manager put 0 in the allowed hours. Now notice there's a reason column. If you don't allow all of the assessment hours, you have to give a reason why not allowing those. There is only a certain number of reasons that you can give. They are in a drop-down list. Here's the button right here for that drop-down list. On the next slide, I'm going to show you the drop-down list options that you can select from as reasons why you're not going to allow all of the assessed hours. The first one simply says PM determination, which means that you have a reason that you have determined that those hours are not going to be allowed, and you should probably narrate what those reasons are in case narration. The next option is decline, so maybe the client did not need that many hours and only requested a lesser number of hours, so in that case, the hours were offered to the consumer, but the consumer declined using all the hours. The next one is decline due to pay-in. So if the reason that the consumer does not want all the hours is because there is a pay-in according to our OPI sliding fee scale, and they think that that's a bit too much for their budget, so they want lesser hours, then they have declined some hours based on financial reasons, and so you'll select decline due to pay-in. There's also the reason of natural support. So let's say in this example, there is a natural support in the person's life with shopping free of charge all the time, and so there's no reason for a paid provider to do shopping. So in that case, we would select, instead of not available, we would select natural support, because the natural support is taking care of those hours. Now, not available is a good reason to use when we have exceeded our AAA plan maximum hours. So if your maximum hours are 20 and there's 26 hours, assessment hours, you're not going to be able to allow all of those hours. So the reason you're not allowing the additional 6 hours is because our area plan limits it. It simply is not available to the consumer. And then the last reason that you might select is provided by another agency. And there may be a community program or agency that assists our clients certain things that would normally be paid for through the OPI program. Now, in OPI, we don't want to duplicate services already provided to the individual. So if those services are already provided, then we would not allow those hours, and we would select the reason that it's provided by another agent. Okay, let's move forward. Now, on this same screen, once the case manager has selected the allowed hours and entered them in the white column, you're going to see at the bottom of the screen a kind of summary of everything that you've done. So here so far on this screen, the total authorized hours are 10 ADL minimum hours and 10 IADL hours. Notice that there is an allowed hours column and also an exception hours line. Those two lines are for the purposes of other CAPS assessments that do utilize exception hours, and it would be providing a total. So if we're satisfied that everything looks fine, that the authorized hours are exactly as we want them to be, we will press the OK button. Once we press the OK button, the total of allowed hours is going to show on the service planning. And you see here circled, I have that the status of the hours is pending and that 20 allowed hours are in the plan. Okay, let's move forward. And we're going to go next, service planning itself, now that we've finished hours. But I want you to know that as we go to the bottom section, we might have to use several lines. And I'll give you reasons why we would use several lines. And I want to show you that there is an Add a Record button right here next to the word Services for Plan Number 1. Now, if you're wondering what that number 1 means, up here in the hours segment, there's a line, and it's line number 1. So these hours correspond to a plan number 1. So you can have several hours segments. If you made adjustments to the hours, you might have line 2 of hours, and you might have several lines. But this is service plan number 1, and we'll select this button if we want to add extra rows here. I'll show you that in a moment. So to begin the service plan segment, you click on the services box, pointed out right here. Once you do that, a blue highlighted line will appear, and remember the end date autofill, also in this section. And what we'll need to do is, under the services category, we will need to use a drop-down list by clicking on the blue box and select one of the following. For OPI, we're going to select either adult day services, delivered meals, in-home care using an agency, in-home care using an hourly home care worker, miscellaneous OPI services, or choose a natural support. So you'll need to choose one of those. And for our example that we're going to be doing today, we're going to be using an hourly home care worker. And so we select the hourly home care worker, which you see now has appeared here under the services section. Now, in order for us to select this home care worker, we're going to do a provider search. So we're going to use the provider search button here at the bottom. Once we press that button, a pop-up window will appear that looks just like this one that I have outlined in red. And you have two options, and that is to find the provider and do a search for them, or to use a placeholder. And TBD means to be determined. So there are times, for example, that clients have two home care workers. One home care worker quits, and so we switch the service planning to give the other home care worker all the hours, and in the meanwhile, while they're searching for a second home care worker, we use a placeholder in order for us to be able to approve a plan. That would be an example of where you would use the placeholder. We're going to click on the button that says Find Provider, and we're going to say OK. So next we will open an entirely new screen by doing that will allow us to search. Now, if you already know the name of the home care worker that has been hired and their provider number, ideally what you would do is simply search for them using their provider number. To do that, you would come right up here to the upper right-hand corner, place their provider number in that box, and here the arrow points to the search button. Press search, and it would look at that particular provider number and find your home care worker. Now, if you don't know the provider number and you know the name of the person, enter in their last name and their first name and do a search by name. You can also narrow down the search by placing the name of a city box. That would eliminate people of the same name who live in other cities in Oregon. So once we do that, we are going to get a list of providers of that same name or a similar name, and we'll have to find the correct home care worker less than. But we begin with this search. Now, if you can narrow down the search as much as possible, that would be very helpful. And it's best if we do know provider numbers. So what I like to do is request provider numbers from the home care workers, and if our client is the one doing the searching for the home care worker, I ask them not only to tell me the name of the home care worker that they've hired, but the provider number of that home. If it's a little bit too complicated for our client to do that, I ask them to have the home care worker call me, and the home care worker usually can always provide me with their provider number. That helps me in my search for them. Okay, so once we do a search for that person, and in this case I was searching for Jane Doe, we will get a list of either one person that fits that provider number or many people that have the same or similar name. Now, what is it that we know about this home care worker? Well, first of all, we know that their specialty over here on the right-hand side is home care worker, so we have selected the right category of person. See here their provider number, so if we've done a search according to their name, we can now see what their provider number is. Here under enrollment, you see the letter A. That means that this particular home care worker is an active home care worker. Now, there are some home care workers that for one reason or another, their credentials expire. Now, this can happen if they forget to do their biannual or annual criminal background check, whatever is required of them, and they're a little bit late on that, their credentials could expire. In that case, you will not be able to use that home care worker. You'll only be able to use active home care. So once you've found the correct person, you will use the Add to Assessment button pointed by the red arrow. And as you press that button, then the person will be added to your service. Now here we see that we need now to enter a begin date for this particular home care worker. Now on this slide, under provider name, there is no name, but normally there would be a name in this box of the person that you select. So we need to select a begin date. That's the first day that they begin working for our client or consumer, and we will enter that date. Now, in order to add another line, and some agencies require 2 lines because they have different rates between personal care and housekeeping, that really is up to the OPI contract with that particular agency. Some agencies do not require that. It's the same rate. You will only need 1 line. Instead of selecting a line here for in-home care for an hourly home care worker, you will select an agency. And if they only require 1 line because they have 1 rate, then you're good to go. If they require 2 lines, then you will need 2 lines, and you'll need to separate housekeeping hours from personal. But you will use the Add a Record button if you do need that second line. Okay, so for a single home care worker that we've selected, we now need to use the buttons along the bottom of service planning for this particular worker. And I will tell you that we will also need to do the same for each additional worker that's chosen. So for example, if there are 2 home care workers, we're going to have to go through this same process both home care. So on this particular one, we've already done the provider search and selected the home care worker. Next, we see the needs association button. And we're going to talk about the function of that button. So if you press needs association, it will open up a pop-up window that will give the provider's name. Now, please remember that the acronym CEP, which is Client Employer Program, is synonymous with home care worker. So if you see HCW or CEP, they are one and the same. That is talking about a home care worker. So for this particular home care worker, the system defaults to selecting all of the needs of the client for that particular home care worker. If that looks good to you and all the selected needs are on the right-hand column, in this example it's dressing, eating, housekeeping, and laundry, if that home care worker is going to be doing all of those tasks, then all we need to do is press the OK button and we're good to go forward. Now the reason for this needs association is because this is how the task list. So these things will appear on the task list. They've been selected as needs. So for example, if laundry is done by a natural support and we do not want this home care worker to do laundry and we don't even want it to appear on the task list, then we will need to deselect laundry by double-clicking on it. It will move from the selected column to the unselected needs column. And that means for this particular home care worker, laundry will not appear on their task list. So that's the whole purpose behind this exercise of this needs association button. So again, those needs that aren't going to be used, you will double click on them or you will drag them over to the unselected column, and that's how they are deselected. Okay, we're going to go beyond this and go to the next button, which is the View Assign Hours button. Now here, this button allows us to look at the hours that have been allowed by the case manager and to assign them either to the home care worker or agency providers, and also gives us the opportunity, if we have more than one provider, like 2 home care workers, divide the hours between them. So by pressing the View Assign Hours button, see a new screen. And in this screen, we are going to see the hours, kind of a summary of the hours on the top portion. We'll see the assessment hours and the allowed hours. Now, the bottom portion, also going to see a list of those allowed hours and authorized hours. But we're going to see the name of the home care worker right here. And the letter P in the column in front of their name means this is a paid provider. Now, if we had entered the name of a natural support, we'd also see a second line here. And instead of a P, we would see the letter U. That means unpaid provider. So in this case, there's only one home care worker. And this line is going to be blank. It's going to be blue. It's going to have all zeros. And we're going to have to select from the authorized hours, place the number of hours that we're giving this home care worker. In this case, the case manager entered in 10 hours under the ADL minimum column and 10 hours under the IADL column, which means we gave all the hours to this particular. Now, let's talk a little bit about those hours. We've already discussed what assessed hours are and allowed hours and exception hours, but let me give you an example of them. So, for example, for OPI, most of our allowed hours are also going to be considered authorized hours. Because the system has the ability to use exception hours, it allows us to have allowed hours plus exception hours, and that would equal authorized hours. But because we usually do not use exception hours for OPI, our example here is that there's 20 allowed hours plus 0 exception hours equals 20 authorized hours. So most often for OPI, allowed hours and authorized hours are one and the same. There's no difference between the two. Please don't be confused by them. I know we're using a lot of labels for these hours, but the allowed hours and authorized hours are one and the same. Okay, so as we look and assign those hours to the home care worker, and here we've assigned 10 ADL and 10 IADL hours, we want to know if we have used all the hours. There's a nifty little button here that says show me what's left. If you press the show me what's left button, you'll get a pop-up that will tell you that you didn't use some of the authorized hours. And then that gives you a chance to come back here and make whatever changes you need to utilize all the hours. It's usually not something you need to do. You only have a minimum number of hours as we do for OPI. But when hours begin to get a little more complicated and there's more hours, that's when people use the show me what's left button. But if this looks good, if the 10 and 10 hours, which are 20 hours total for this home care worker, what we want, press the OK button. Here again is the show me what's left button for that pop-up that I just explained. Okay, now adding a natural support. If there are natural supports in the person's life, it is good that those natural supports would be identified. Just very briefly, remember that on the client page of Access, which is the page that first opens up when you open up the case, that has the person's name, their birthday, their social security number, living situation. There are several tabs, folder tabs, on that page, and one of them is the Contact tab. On that Contact tab, we list the important people that have relationship with this individual. Some of those people are emergency contacts. There may also be authorized representatives or powers of attorney. But we also need to give them the role of natural support if they are providing any kind of services to our clients. So as you give them the role of natural support, then you will have options available to select that natural support right here in service planning. So in order to add a second line to add a natural support, we would use the Add a Record button, which is pointed at by this arrow here. That would open up a second line of natural support. We would use the drop-down list that lists all of those options we reviewed earlier. And the last option, or next to the last, is going to be natural support, and we're going to choose that. Now, in order for us to do a provider search, there will need to be people on the contacts list that have a natural support role. If there are no people in the contacts list with a natural support role, you will not be able to select a provider for this line. And you need to select someone to be a natural support, or you will need to invalidate it. Now, if this line is an invalid entry, there is a little box, this column on the right-hand side that says invalid entry. So if we hit natural support and we can't find a natural support and there really is none available, we're going to just click on this little box. That will put a check mark in it, and that line is then going to be an invalid entry line. Be a non-issue. It will not get in the way of anything else in service plan. Now, once we do select the natural support, doing our provider search, it will look as we see here, except in the provider name box, there will be the name of a natural support. Okay. So in order for us to just maybe go back and show you, here is the folders on that client page. This is the contact. Know that you will need to select an option. Okay, the bottom line, we've already covered provider searches, needs association, view assign hours. Last button, provider detail button. We will only need to use this for paid services like home care workers or agents. When we press this provider detail button, it will allow us to enter information that will go into the 546N and determine billing schedules, transportation miles, and approve the task list. So there's actually a lot that we're going to be doing with the provider detail button. So we're going to push the provider detail button, and it will open up a new screen. And the first thing you're going to see on this screen is the information associated with the provider or the home care worker of that line that has been highlighted. In this case, you would see the home care worker's provider number, their name, their address, their phone number, and also the dates that they were assigned to the service plan. Now, if that's the correct home care worker that you want to work on, you will now click on the 546 Details button for us to enter in. When you do that, a new screen will open up, and you'll be able to do several different things on this screen. Now notice, there are 3 tabs at the top, and we happen to be in the Financial tab. So in the Financial tab, at the very top, it says Mileage Authorization. So if you want to add mileage, or if that is a benefit that your AAA allows for OPI, in-home services for a home care worker, then you would select the number of miles in that box as transportation miles. Those miles are going to appear voucher, and they're going to be allowed to claim up to that maximum number of miles that you have determined, and it will allow them to get paid a certain amount per mile. Now, the next line you see is the billing schedule, and we have two options there. They can get paid, or if they prefer, they can get paid twice a month. Now, it really is the option of the home care worker to select when or how many times a month they want to get paid. This is according to the union contract made with the state of Oregon. So if they want to get paid once a month, then when we push that once a month button, they're only going to get one voucher a month. If we select twice a month, they're going to get a voucher from the 1st to the 15th, then a second voucher later, 16th, end of the month. And that will be the two vouchers they will receive every month. You'll also see here that we have a remark box. These remarks are really remarks meant for the worker that processes the voucher. So if, for example, there was a change in home care workers, you filled in the 546 details here, your remarks probably should be new home care work. This alerts the worker processing the voucher that they need to make a change in who the worker is and not just automatically issue a voucher to the last worker that received a voucher for this particular client. Or if this is an annual review and hours have changed or been adjusted, you'll want to make that remark. It just all depends on any change that may have happened on the case that would affect hours and vouchers. Should have a remark, so that alerts the worker to know that there have been some changes, or possibly that this is a new OPI case that they're going to have to. Okay, so we've covered this financial tab, and you will also note that there are other tabs at the top, including the task list. So in order for us to select task for the task list, we will click on that tab. That will open up a new window, and you will see listed all of the items that are available to this particular based upon the CAHPS assessment. Now, this example, there isn't too much. There's only toileting. But there could be several categories, including mobility, toileting, housekeeping, laundry, medication management. Everything could be here depending on the needs of the client. So what we need to do is select from that category most appropriate tasks for this particular individual. Now I'm using toileting as a good example for us because we just wouldn't go down the list and click everything. So for example, it says assisting using a bedpan code. If our clients do not use bedpans or urinals, we would not click on that task. So we want to only click on the tasks that are appropriate for our client. So you're going to need to take some time and consideration thinking about your assessment with the client and your visit with them, come up with an appropriate task list. Once you have selected all of the tasks, and there will be a check mark next to those boxes that you've selected, you will need to verify that you have reviewed the task list and you're authorizing all of the items that you've checked. So there's a little box, and it's right here, and click on that to verify you've reviewed the authorized list. Now, anytime case managers forget this little box, and if you forget this little box, check mark, you will not be able to approve your service plan. So this is essential. Approving the service plan is actually clicking Verify Task List. Now, there is a section for remarks, and I just want to put maybe a slight warning on the remarks. Please do not add tasks remark section that are not authorized by OPI. For example, the OPI rules and the long-term care rules, which also govern OPI, forbid us from allowing home care workers yard work or pet care, or bill paying, for example. So if we put yard work down in the remark section as an additional task, we are actually authorizing the home care worker to do yard work against the rules. Another violation is that the union contract with the home care workers does not allow yard work, and workman's compensation insurance does not cover the home care worker doing yard work. So if they get hurt on the job doing yard work, then there are going to be quite a bit of problems because there's going to be a conflict. The conflict is that was authorized, but should not have been authorized. So please just stick to the things that are at the top. If you want to fine-tune something, that is, if you want to give an extra explanation of why housekeeping needs to be done in a particular way because of client sensitivities, you can put that in remarks, but don't add additional tasks. Once you're done with the task list, you'll want to say OK. So now we're going to repeat this process for every home care worker. Bottom, if there's only one home care worker, then we're done. And you see here that we're now ready to approve all of the service planning segments. Finished with your home care worker, you will see that the benefit is impending, the hours are impending, and the plan is impending. Now that we've completed each one of those segments, so what we'll do is start with the benefit action button. It will open up a new window, and you will select Approve Benefit from the several options that you'll have there. We'll do the same with the Hours action button. You'll want to approve the hours. And next you'll want to move to the Plan action button. Now, once we have approved all of those segments of service planning, then we should see under the status that each area should say approved. Now notice in this example that there is an invalidated OPI benefit line. That is an example of a line that was put in by error, and we invalidated it. It's a non-issue. It doesn't interfere with planning, but it doesn't disappear either. It's going to be there forever, but it says invalid, and so we're not using that line for anything. We're only using the active line, and so the active benefit line is approved, and so are the hours and the plan. So now that we have completed the service plan, it is possible for you to print the 546, which is the CAPS in-home service plan. That is what you give to other workers depending on the process of your office. Perhaps you yourself process 546s, but it is a way of us generating vouchers, mainframe system. And then we can also print the Form 598, which is the task list, which is required to go to both the client consumer and the home care worker. And we can also print Form 4105, which you will not find on the Access printer. You'll have to go to the Forms section of DHS, go to the Forms server, select 4105, and give a notice of authorization to the home care worker to begin services. A full discussion of these forms is found in the training we did previously called Fees, and those will be available on State Unit on Aging website. Okay, so some case managers wonder what to do in service planning for a one-time service that's offered to the OPI program, such as chore services or assistive technology, etc. In this case, not selecting a home care worker, not selecting an agency, but we do need an approved service plan, because if we don't have a benefit and plan in place, our OPI CAPS assessment is going to expire in 60 or 90 days, and it's going to invalidate itself, and then it can't be used. So we don't want that to happen. If we're providing a one-time service, we will need a service plan. In order to do that, you would do the same thing that you normally do by selecting an OPI service benefit. And in the hours segment, you will need to select at least 1 hour as an allowed or authorized hour. Now, the reason that we need to select an hour, even if we're not going to give an hour to any worker, because we provide assistive technology, for example, it's just the system will not allow us to approve the service plan unless the hours segment has at least 1 hour. That 1 hour is just going to be a placeholder. It's going to be a way of us getting beyond the hours segment so that we can do service planning. So you will need to approve at least 1 hour in that hours. Now, here at the top of the screen, I've showed you that we're selecting 1 allowed hour. We're using the reason CM determination for why we're not selecting all the other hours, saying okay, and we're approving it, and we should be good to go in our segment. Now, down where it comes to service planning in the bottom section, you would select from the drop-down list miscellaneous OPI services. So if your AAA allows you to do chore services or allows you to do assistive technology or any other one-time thing, you will choose the OPI miscellaneous services. Now, when it comes to a provider, there is not going to be a provider that has a provider number. So because of that, we're going to use the placeholder. So remember, we have option when we do the provider search using the provider search button. Use the placeholder to be determined. When we press that button, what we see here in the name section is simply to be determined or to be selected. So then we would put a begin date, and that would probably be the date that that service offered, that chore service began or ended, and it would also be for a one-time expense like buying a piece of equipment. It would be the date that that equipment was purchased, and you might want to put the very same end date so that this service line begins on one day and ends the same day, because it's a one-time service. We're not really providing services over a period of time. So once we do that, and we have a full line including the date, we can then go the provider detail button. Now remember, because this is miscellaneous OPI services, you have to assign at least one task in the task list. This is also something that the system requires, so we can't override that. We just have to work with the system. So go to provider detail, go to 546 details, the task list, one task, verify that one task, and once you've done that, you'll be able to go to the plan action button and approve this service plan, miscellaneous OPI services for 1 day. Now, when we do something like this, we'll need to be sure to narrate in case narration why we're using miscellaneous OPI services, what that service is, who is providing the service, what the cost of the service is, why the individual is eligible for that service, and how it's going to be billed. Once we narrate all of that and explain that we have approved a service plan, miscellaneous services, then that's all the explanation that's needed. Everything can be traced back to narration. It's fully explained. There's no mystery. And so narration is a very important part of service planning, especially when we're using miscellaneous. So having the service plan approved for a one-time service allows that OPI assessment to remain active. It's not going to expire or become invalid. And remember that when we do one-time services through OPI for individuals, we do need a CAPS assessment, need an appropriate SPL according to guidelines of your area plan and your AAA, and the individual has to meet all of the OPI eligibility requirements. If they meet all those requirements, they would be eligible then for the one-time service. Okay, so that really is an end to our service planning discussion and training today. If you have any other questions about service planning, address your questions to the State Unit on Aging. And this training is being recorded and will be placed on the State Unit on Aging website, be available for any future needs. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. Really appreciate that. It was a lot of really good information. And again, this is the fourth module in a series of 4 that we're doing specifically for those of you who provide OPI assessment and support to consumers. And as Mark said, each of these 4 modules is on the State Unit on Aging website under the OPI section. The first one was called OPI Basics. The second one is OPI Forms and Fees. The third one is CAPS Assessment and Client Detail. And this fourth one is Service Planning. It's really ideal for you to watch them in order, but you don't absolutely have to, and they're always there for review. So thanks again so much to everybody, and we hope that you will be able to answer all your questions, and if not, contact me or someone else at the State Unit on Aging. Thanks so much.